Welcome back once again to another Battlebots review. We're now on to episode 13. My goodness, this has been so exciting, and I'm not going to waste any time. Let's just jump into this. Now, the fight card this time around on the outset was far more exciting to me than last week's, with Quantum, Endgame, Fusion, Rotator, Scorpios, Ribbot, Dragon King, Terratops, Copperhead, and Ripperoni. This could be incredible. What a stacked card. But the fight cards do have a way of surprising me for better and for worse. As for example, I was pleasantly surprised by last week's episode. So I knew that I had to keep my expectations in check when heading into this one. So let's jump into this. The first fight was Emulsifier versus Quantum. Now this fight, in my opinion, could have gone either way. It all depended on if Emulsifier could finally get those full power shots. Emulsifier, I thought, would actually go for one of their fork attachments, but they actually decided to go with a similar approach to Gruff, with some pieces of metal to deal with Quantum's biting power. They looked simple, but very effective, at least more so than Gruff's, as they looked a bit thicker. Quantum also went for their solid wedge, which I worried would come back to bite them, as if they took damage, they risked the wedge becoming unusable for the rest of the fight. Now the buzzer sounded and Quantum raced right for Emulsifier, who managed to rip off one of Quantum's fangs with a nice hit. That didn't stop Quantum, however, who bit into one of the treads. When they let go, Emulsifier got another shot in, but Quantum was relentless, slowing the weapon down, and they tried going in for another bite when disaster struck as the other tooth came off. However, Quantum still had a lot of grabbing power and managed to grab Emulsifier and just began pushing them around easily, even managing to rip off one of those crusher protectors Emulsifier puts on. Emulsifier gets some sparks in, but clearly is not designed to be like Death Row and just can't get their shots in like they'd want to, as Quantum shoves them about into the screws and Emulsifier at some point stops moving. Emulsifier barely keeps moving enough to avoid a counter and does end up popping Quantum up with a nice weapon shot, and Quantum has to grapple with them, but Emulsifier appears to end up stuck on a floor seam. The countout begins anew, but they manage to reach the 3 minutes at the 2 count, which means they were so close to losing right there. Now the judges of course give it to Quantum, and I have two major takeaways from this. Quantum of course is incredible, and one of the best crushers the Sword has ever seen. Yes, up there with Razor in my opinion. But still, it has not yet fought a major vert this season that is at its full potential, such as a robot like Endgame or Minotaur, which could really give them issues. We saw that last week with Claw Viper, and I feel we really haven't had that chance to see how Quantum will deal with a similar threat. Quantum going 4-0 obviously though is genuinely incredible in my book, and I am super happy for them, but they will have to be ready for that round of 32, because at this point, round of 32, they cannot afford to lose once, because then they'll be out. Emulsifier on the other hand is a robot that I think has a ton of potential, but definitely seems to need to figure some things out. The main wedge they came with seems perfect for horizontal spinners, but they need to figure out what they're going to do with the ground clearance. They either need to get as low as possible, or try something akin to Death Roll in my uneducated opinion. Still, I could be an armchair builder all I like, but Bots FC will absolutely be able to improve Emulsifier with no doubt in my mind, so chances are they've already been thinking long and hard on how to improve the robots. Next up was Endgame vs Gigabyte, which I already predicted right away was going to be a quick squash match. I have a soft spot for Gigabyte, sure, but Endgame is vicious. Again, former champion. A robot that could easily deflect them, and I just knew this was going to be short and sweet. Maybe not so much for Gigabyte though. The fight begins, and while both robots got up to speed, Endgame wastes no time with a huge hit, actually taking out a clock by slamming Gigabyte into it and ripping off the Shremek pole. Another almighty hit turns Gigabyte over into its Beyblade position, but Gigabyte knows they're done and just stops spinning, assuming they could keep going. As the robot is badly damaged and Endgame back up, gyro dancing for victory as Gigabyte is counted out. Now let's be honest, this was only ever really going to go one way, but did we expect it to end this quickly? Absolutely incredible by Endgame, who has done everything they can to redeem themselves after the Ripperoni loss, and I think an emphatic victory like that is going to be considered when heading to the round of 32. Of course, at the end of the day, like was said, it doesn't really matter what number they get, round of 32 is still the round of 32, but man, that was a hell of a performance. Next up was ShredderBro versus Overhaul. Again, this was a fight I felt ShredderBro had little to no chance in. That drum just hasn't been consistent enough for me, and the ground game was, in my opinion, definitely going to be Overhaul's. Both robots are cautious in the beginning of the fight, but Overhaul does get a nice lift in from behind, but then ShredderBro turns, and their drum is so slow that Overhaul just grabs it and drives them into the screws. ShredderBro tries again, and you get to finally hear that frightening death hum, but Overhaul causes ShredderBro to use its energy on the arena with another grab that slams them about. ShredderBro gets back up to speed and gets some nice shots in return. Overhaul keeps going and does keep pushing ShredderBro about, but the sparks flying are undeniable. ShredderBro gets another shot in, and Overhaul once again retaliates with more lifts and shoves. However, ShredderBro continues humming about as they manage to flip Overhaul over and just keep going, causing Overhaul to flip over once again. In the final moments, they get a more massive shots in on Overhaul and finally get in some major damage as Overhaul's drive seems to give up right at the final moments. It looks like there's some post-fight hits, but Evan backs up and there seems to be no ill will. Still felt it right to mention anyway, you know, if I'm going to mention the Riptide Shredderator fight, I feel like I should mention it anyway. But it goes to the judges who, in a split decision, give it to ShredderBro in a shock in the end. And honestly, this fight was way more competitive than I thought it would be. Just as I begin losing hope in ShredderBro, they finally give me the performance I've been waiting to see from them. The drum has a nice death hum when it really gets going, and Overhaul was getting thrown around. Overhaul, of course, is better than it's ever been in my opinion, and it did have some nice moments in this match. So all in all, this fight was way better than I expected it to be. Not a huge hitter, but it absolutely beat my expectations. Next up was Rotator versus Fusion, which was a fight that, again, I was especially split on. On one end we have Rotator, who is especially reliable and durable, with a pretty nice weapon, but as we've seen, Fusion has two very capable weapons. That means Rotator could have been struggling in either case, but with that lack of reliability, made it so I wasn't sure how it could fall. Now the battle begins and Rotator and Fusion goes vert on plow, but the first shot sends Fusion flying. Fusion ends up getting a nice shot in with the horizontal, which causes them to fly off once again. And another nice exchange, and Fusion's horizontal spinner dies briefly before the vert seems to give up instead. Rotator was very hesitant as Fusion and Rotator got up to speed, but Fusion ends up catching on fire as Rotator finally goes in for a hit, and while Rotator's weapons seem to die, Fusion entirely dies at this point and is counted out. I'm a little disappointed by the ending of this fight, I won't lie. Both robots gave some mighty hits in the beginning, but the trepidation by Rotator and Fusion's reliability issues coming back caused this fight to end on a bit of a damp note. Next up was Ribot versus Scorpios, and again I felt this one was going to be a tough one to call. Ribot is typically a robot that I'd go for every time, but it just hasn't seemingly worked out in its previous fights. Though coming out with 7 forks, they really were trying their best to ensure that there was going to be nothing left to chance. But listen, I'll try to avoid talking about the lack of symmetry of the forks, you know, how one side has one less fork, how the long forks aren't even in the same position on each side. No, I'm not going to talk about it. We're going to move on. The fight starts and Ribot races out, but Scorpios wins the ground game initially, with their thicker forks pushing under Ribot, and they get some nice shots in. Ribot, however, returns in kind and causes the weapon chain of Scorpios to come loose. Scorpios does get under again, but all they can do is bat at the frog. Ribot retaliates with some major shots on the Scorpios. Scorpios is getting to fight a Ribot that's desperate to redeem itself in its last fight. Scorpios does keep going, but Ribot is tearing them apart. Soon their forks are damaged, their left tire is basically gone, and just in general, Scorpios looks a mess. After some more sparks, Ribot backs up as Scorpios is counted out. Ripoff ends off on a KO victory, and finally, we get to see the Ripoff we've been waiting for all season. This was a fun, if brief fight. Scorpios did get a nice bit early on, but Ripoff did some insane damage. Before the next fight, we have the hype package for Copperhead versus Ripperoni, which is honestly such a cool fight. Ripperoni stunned everyone with its win over Endgame, but Copperhead has proven to be amazing at taking out robots that are leaning into wilder spinner designs, what with it just being a very solid, sturdy package. At the same time, Ripperoni is unlike anything Copperhead has ever faced before, so this genuinely could go either way. But before that, we have Terratops versus Dragon King. Off topic, but I do wonder if these exhibition fights will continue. What with Destructophon apparently planning to add proving grounds for new teams and designs, we might want to enjoy Dragon King while we can. Terratops, on the other hand, I have a feeling will be a little more safe. It's got a pretty good spinner and the lifter also seems pretty decent, so I have a feeling they may get an invitation to Season 8. Assuming it does in fact take place. The match begins and both robots come out and Terratops gets the first shot, but Dragon King returns with a go at its saw. It's a really good driving fight as Dragon King gets around and gets a brief bite. Terratops is well built, but as a rookie team, they're definitely being outdriven in the early stages. However, with a weapon like Terratops, it only takes one mistake, much like the Claw Viper Hypershock fight, which is what they get as they manage to rip off one of Dragon King's tracks. Terratops Spinner does seem to give up after this, but they manage to get some great lifts on Dragon King, one involving into a suplex as it hooks onto Dragon King's mouth. Dragon King refuses to give up, however, as it keeps trying to drive with that last half of its drive, but Terratops keeps the aggression going with some more lifts. Terratops ends up taking the judge's decision in the end, and much like both of these robots' previous fights, while maybe not a heavy hitter, I actually really enjoyed watching them. I feel like Dragon King might be a lower card equivalent to free shipping for me in terms of entertainment value, where if it does well, there's enough uniqueness to make it a blast to watch in action, and even when losing, there's so much going on here, it's fun to watch it just get killed. And Terratops for a rookie robot is way better than you would think. Sure, it has some reliability issues, and they clearly aren't ready to go for the giant nut just yet as they work out the driving, but man, is it doing very well here for such a new team. 2-0 definitely makes it likely we'll see them return. And now it's time for the main event, Copperhead versus Ripperoni. Copperhead had a very fun pizza-themed entrance. Meanwhile, Ripperoni came out with ham and pineapple. Biggest villains in Battlebots. Okay, confession. I don't think I've ever actually had ham and pineapple. Maybe when I was like really little. Still, I think that's something more I dislike texturally rather than the flavour. Anyway, I've gone over why this fight is so hyped for me. You got the crazy Ripperoni and the far more sensible Copperhead, but both are pretty much just as capable as each other. I don't want to go into this. Let's not waste any time. The robots get up to speed in the early goings, but a major driving mistake on Copperhead's part meant Ripperoni got a huge shot in, flipping them over. Ripperoni then goes in for another shot and end up immobilizing Copperhead. And even when rereading my notes to record this, I forgot how short this was. And this has to be like the shortest main event on Battlebots since it first came back in like 2015. I mean, it ended so quickly that not only did they hype up next week's main event before the fight, but essentially became a Chris and Kenny podcast at the end as they discussed how likely the roles this episode are to move on. Which, don't get me wrong, I would totally be down for a Chris and Kenny podcast, but it's kind of wild. This means that Ripperoni, of course, wins another fight, but we didn't get to see what would happen in a normal circumstance due to that lethally bad bit of driving, and we're really starting to see a bit of a reputation for the main event for ending way too quickly. I've heard some people complain about that, how the main events have just been so short lately, but this has got to be the worst case. And I think overall, it kind of sums up this episode for me. It's a pretty hit and miss one. A few of the fights ended a little too early for my liking, and there was still some fun battles, but overall, I was really excited for Copperhead and Ripperoni, so I can't help but feel a little let down in the end. But there's still some little glimmers in that I think you should check out. I'd recommend checking out stuff like Terratops, because we might be seeing them as a genuine contender next season, and I think it'd be good to see them in their early stages. Of course, stuff like Ribbot getting one last actual look in, we get to see the best fight of ShredderBro and Overhaul. There's still some bright spots in this episode, but I am a little disappointed overall. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to hit that notification bell to be notified of future videos on the channel. Comment and let me know what you thought of this episode yourself. What did you think of it? Did you like the episode? Did you dislike the episode? And if you can share this video around with your friends, that would be super appreciated. There's been a lot of support on the channel recently. It's been super appreciated. I can't thank you all enough. But with that being said, I'll see you all next time.